Caleb Rohr pressed his daughter's hand so hard the girl winced, but he didn't let go. The stage was 4 hours late, and every man at that depot had already turned away from the road. But not Caleb. He kept his eyes on that empty horizon, like looking away would make it final. Ruby tugged his sleeve. "Papa," she whispered, "do you think she changed her mind?" He didn't answer, because the truth was, he was terrified she had. Subscribe and drop your city in the comments. Let's see how far this story travels. The stage was supposed to arrive at noon. By 2 o'clock, Caleb Rohr was still standing at the far end of the depot platform, one hand on Ruby's shoulder, the other gripping the brim of his hat. He hadn't moved in an hour. The men who'd been waiting with him had drifted off one by one back to their wagons, back to their business, back to lives that didn't hang on a stagecoach being 4 hours late. Caleb stayed. "Papa." Ruby's voice was small beside him. "She ain't coming, is she?" "She's coming." "But it's been—" "She's coming, Ruby." His voice came out harder than he meant it to. He felt her go still under his hand, and he loosened his grip, tried to soften something in his face. "She's coming," he said again, quieter. "Just late." Ruby looked up at him with those dark eyes that always said more than her mouth did. She had Sarah's eyes. Every single day that fact found a new way to cut him. What if she decided she don't want to come no more? Caleb crouched down to his daughter's level. She was 9 years old and already too smart for her own good, too accustomed to things not working out. "Miss Dawson wrote me 14 letters, he said. 14. You don't write a man 14 letters if you ain't serious. "Mama wrote letters too," Ruby said quietly. "And then she died anyway." He didn't have an answer for that. He just pulled his daughter close and held her there on that platform with the July heat pressing down on them and the silence of the empty road stretching out to the south. Ruby was right. She usually was. Loss didn't ask permission. It didn't care how many letters you'd written or how much you needed a thing to work out. It came when it wanted, and it took what it pleased. He'd learned that 2 years ago, and the lesson had not gotten easier with time. Hank Dooley came out of the depot office at 2:30, and the look on his face told Caleb everything before the man opened his mouth. Roar. Hank pulled off his cap and held it against his chest. That was never a good sign. Caleb straightened up. "Don't." "I got a wire just now from the relay station at Dry Creek. Hank, there was trouble on the road. Heavy rain last night washed out the embankment at the crossing. The stage went over." The words landed flat and deliberate. Caleb felt them move through him the way cold water moves through a man slow at first, then all at once. "Passengers," he said. Hank twisted the cap in his hands. "Some were traveling on to Laramie. They managed to get themselves to safety at the relay station. But there was a woman traveling alone. Schoolteacher, they said, carrying a single trunk." Caleb said nothing. "She didn't make it to the relay station with the others. Roar. Nobody knows where she ended up." Ruby had gone rigid beside him. Her small hand found Caleb's fingers and locked around them. "How long ago?" Caleb said. "Wire came in maybe an hour back, which means the accident." "How long ago, Hank?" Hank exhaled through his nose. "Sometime before dawn, early this morning." Caleb did the math. 8 hours, maybe 9. A woman alone on foot in July heat that had been sitting above 90 since the end of June. "I need my horse," Caleb said. "Roar, the sheriff's already sending a man. I need my horse." He looked Hank in the eye. "Where exactly?" "Dry Creek Crossing, 4 miles south. But you listen to me, if she's been out there since before dawn in this heat." "I hear you." Caleb was already moving. "Papa, I'm coming with you." "No." He didn't break his stride. Ruby matched him step for step across the depot yard. "But she might need a woman to—" "Ruby. She don't know you. You're a stranger to her. She might be scared and—" "Ruby." He stopped. She nearly walked into his back. He turned and looked at her, and she looked up at him with Sarah's eyes full of argument and worry in equal measure. "You're going to Mrs. Hennessy's," he said. "You're going to stay there until I ride back in. That's final." What if she's... Ruby's jaw worked. She swallowed whatever word she'd almost said. What if she didn't make it? He crouched in front of his daughter, right there in the dirt of the depot yard. And he put both hands on her face, the way he used to when she was small, and the nightmares came. "She made it," he said. "How do you know?" "Because a woman who writes 14 letters don't give up that easy." He held her gaze. "And because we roars don't ride out assuming the worst. We ride out and we find out for ourselves. You remember that." Ruby pressed her lips together. She gave one hard nod. "Good girl." He kissed her forehead, stood, and walked toward the livery without looking back. He heard her feet on the ground behind him, not moving toward Mrs. Hennessy's. Following him. "Ruby, I'm just watching till you ride out," she called back. "Ain't a law against that." He almost smiled. Almost. The hostler at the livery was an old man named Cass, who moved slow and asked no questions, which was exactly why Caleb kept Scout stabled there. Cass had the horse out and saddled in 4 minutes flat. "You want company?" Cass asked, handing over the reins. "No." "South Road's a mess after last night." "I know it." "That woman might already be—" "I know that too." Caleb put his boot in the stirrup and swung up. "Much obliged, Cass." He rode hard. The South Road was every bit as bad as Cass had warned. The rain had turned the packed earth to mud that grabbed at Scout's hooves in the low places and crumbled at the edges where the shoulder had gone soft. Caleb kept the horse at a canter where the ground held slower, where it didn't reading the road by instinct and by the 20-some years he'd spent in this country learning its moods. He'd ridden this stretch more times than he could count. He and Sarah used to take it in the early mornings when they were first married, before Ruby came before the fever. Before everything fell quiet in a way that a house full of 2 people should never be. He pushed that thought aside the way he always did. Not away. Never fully away. Just aside. There was a task in front of him, and he needed his whole mind for it. He thought about Ellie Dawson instead. He'd read her first letter 7 times the day it arrived, which was not something he'd admitted to anyone, including himself, until just now. She'd written like a woman, who was used to choosing her words with care, a school teacher's habit, he supposed, and every sentence had been precise and considered, and somehow still warm beneath the precision. She'd asked about Ruby first. Not about the land, not about the cabin, not about what he was offering. About the child. That had told him a great deal. Her subsequent letters had told him more. She preferred cornbread to biscuits. She had strong opinions about the proper way to teach long division. She'd once walked 2 miles in February to loan a sick student her only good coat, and had never mentioned it until he asked directly why she'd fallen ill that winter. She did not suffer fools. She did not, as best he could determine, suffer self-pity, either not in herself and not in the people around her. 14 letters over 6 months. And in all of them, not a single word about fear. That more than anything was what had convinced him she was different. Not the absence of fear itself, he didn't believe she lacked it. But the decision to set it aside and write to him anyway, practically and deliberately, and with full knowledge of what she was stepping into. He just hoped she'd held on to that same steadiness this morning. He found the stagecoach at Dry Creek Crossing, just past the 4-mile marker, lying on its side at the bottom of the ravine where the bank had given way. One wheel still turned slowly in the current below. Luggage was scattered along the bank. A woman's hatbox crushed flat, a dark coat half buried in mud, 3 books with their spines broken and their pages fanned open in the clay. Caleb tied Scout to a scrub oak and went down on foot. He checked the coach first, swung the upward-facing door open, and looked inside. Empty. Whatever passengers had been aboard, they'd gotten out. He walked the bank, studying the ground. Their smaller boot prints in the mud pressing deep, moving east along the creek bend toward the stand of cottonwoods. He followed them. He almost walked past her entirely. She'd pulled herself up against a fallen cottonwood on the far side of the creek bend and dragged her coat over herself, despite the July heat, and gone completely still. If she'd been another 2 feet deeper in the shade, he'd have missed her entirely. But she'd left one arm outside the coat. A bare arm in the mud fingers, slightly curled, and on the wrist, a small silver bracelet that caught the light just enough. Caleb crouched beside her. "Miss Dawson." "Nothing. Miss Dawson." He put one hand on her shoulder, firm but careful, and she came awake so fast and so violently that she nearly knocked him backward, scrambling against the log. One arm raised, voice coming out raw and cracked. "Don't get away." "Easy." He held both hands up, palms out. "Easy, ma'am. My name is Caleb Rohr, Red Hollow. I'm the man you've been writing to." She stared at him. Her face was something he hadn't been prepared for, not the way men usually meant when they said that. She was pale under the dirt and the dried blood at her temple. Her dark hair pulled loose from its pins, her dress torn at the shoulder. What stopped him was her eyes. Dark and very clear, and despite everything, absolutely furious. "You're late," she said. He blinked. "The stage was supposed to arrive at noon," she said. Her voice was rough from the heat, but every word was precise. "I have been lying in this ditch. What time is it?" "Going on 4 o'clock. She closed her eyes briefly. 4 hours. Closer to 3. "I came as soon as the wire reached us. The other passengers left." She stated it without accusation, the way you'd state a weather fact. "The man in the brown coat said they needed to reach the relay station. He said someone would come back." A pause. "Someone did not come back. They sent word to the depot. I came instead." He stayed where he was, crouched in the mud a few feet from her, not pushing. "Miss Dawson, are you hurt?" She considered this with more seriousness than the question probably warranted. He found himself leaning forward slightly, watching her think. "My left ankle," she said at last. "I turned it on the slope coming down. It held my weight, but I believe I made it worse since. My head struck the coach door when it rolled. It bled considerably, but has stopped." She pressed one careful hand against her right side, and her jaw tightened for half a second before she released it. "My ribs. Bruised, I believe. Not broken." "You believe? I was a school teacher for 11 years. I've had children fracture my ribs by accident." The look she gave him was steady and dry. "I know what broken feels like. This is not that." He looked at her for a long moment. "You assessed all of that," he said. "Lying alone in a ditch in July heat." It seemed like useful information to have. The breath he let out could have been a laugh if the situation had been different. "All right, Miss Dawson. I've got a horse up the road. I'm going to help you stand, and we're going to get you out of this ravine. Can you do that?" He held out his hand. She looked at it. He could see the calculation happening behind those dark eyes. This woman who had ridden a stagecoach alone across half of Wyoming to marry a stranger who had survived a wreck in a ravine, who had lain in the summer heat for 8 hours and still come out of it with her wits ordered and her fear locked somewhere out of sight. She was deciding if his hand was worth trusting. He waited. She took it. Getting her up that slope was harder than he'd anticipated. She was tougher than she looked. That became clear within the first 10 steps, but the ankle was worse than she'd let on. She made one sound halfway up, half swallowed, when her weight came down wrong on a loose patch of clay. Then she pressed her lips shut and said nothing more about it for the rest of the climb. He'd have carried her if she'd accepted it. He suspected she wouldn't. "Talk to me," he said when they were halfway to the road. "Keeps you moving." "What would you like me to say? How was St. Louis when you left?" She let out a short breath that might have been a laugh. "You want small talk." "I want you thinking about something other than your ankle." A pause. Then, "Hot. St. Louis was hot when I left, though I'd been told Wyoming was hotter. In the summer, some. Yes, I'd been warned." Her grip on his arm tightened as she stepped over a root half buried in the mud. "By nearly everyone I know. That you were coming here. That I'd lost my mind coming here." She said it plainly without bitterness. My sister. My neighbor, Mrs. Foote. The headmistress who'd employed me for 6 years, who told me I was throwing away a perfectly respectable position for a—" She stopped. "For a what?" he said. "For a gamble," she finished. Caleb glanced sideways at her. "Is that what I am?" She glanced back. "Isn't it?" He thought about it honestly. "Reckon we're both gamblers then," he said, "seeing as I did the same thing you did." She said nothing. But something shifted in how she was carrying herself, not much. Enough that he noticed. Memag. Scout was where Caleb had left him unimpressed. Getting Ellie into the saddle required negotiation, and one moment where she nearly went over the far side and grabbed his shoulder to catch herself. She apologized immediately. "Don't," he said. He swung up behind her, took the reins, and felt her go rigid as a fence post. "Miss Dawson, I'm fine. I know that. But you don't have to hold yourself away from me like I'm about to bite. It's a 4-mile ride." A very long pause. Then, the way a person tests ice before committing their full weight, she let herself settle back the smallest degree, just enough to stop fighting the horse's movement with her own spine. "Better?" he asked. "Don't gloat," she said. He kept his eyes on the road. "I got a daughter named Ruby, who's been asking about you since I got your first letter. She's 9, and she's been at Mrs. Hennessy's since I rode out, which means she's been worrying herself for going on 3 hours now." He paused. "She's going to want to know you're all right." Ellie Dawson was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice had changed slightly. Not softer exactly. Differently weighted. "Is she like you?" she asked. "Smarter," he said. "And better looking." "I meant her manner." "I know what you meant." He guided Scout around a deep rut in the road. "She's careful. Watches a situation a long time before she commits to it. Doesn't hand her trust out easy. And when she does, she goes all the way in. Don't know how to do anything halfway." Ellie said nothing for a stretch. The road unrolled ahead of them, muddy and long-edged with summer grass going brown at the tips. "She sounds," Ellie said finally, "like someone worth knowing." Caleb kept his eyes on the horizon where the light was starting to go gold at the edges. "Yeah," he said, "she is." They rode the last miles in a mix of silence and practical conversation. The location of Red Hollow's doctor. Whether Mrs. Hennessy was the type to have supper ready regardless of occasion, the fact that Ruby had given up her room without being asked, which Caleb mentioned, only because he thought Ellie ought to know the kind of child she was dealing with. Ellie absorbed each thing carefully. Cataloging. Near the edge of town, she spoke again. "Mr. Rohr." "Caleb." "Caleb." She said it once like she was deciding if it fit. "I want you to know something before we ride in." "All right." "I wasn't simply going to lie in that ditch until someone came," she said. "I was going to wait until my ankle steadied and then walk to the relay station myself. I had made up my mind to do it." He let that sit for a moment between them. "I believe you," he said. "I'm telling you because I don't want you thinking you rode out to rescue someone helpless. I would have managed on my own." "I don't doubt that for a second." "Then why?" She stopped herself. "Because managing alone is different from not having to," he said quietly. "That was the whole point of 14 letters." The longest silence of the ride followed that. When Red Hollow came into sight ahead, rooftops and the water tower and lamplight already burning in the windows of the main street, Ellie Dawson straightened in the saddle. She squared her shoulders. She lifted her chin by the smallest degree, the way a person does when they are deciding right at that moment that they are equal to what is coming. Caleb watched her do it. He thought Sarah would have liked her. The thought came and went without the usual sting. That was new. Ruby was sitting on Mrs. Hennessy's porch when they rode in, and she was off that porch and running before Scout had fully stopped. She pulled up 3 feet from the horse, looked up at Ellie with those serious dark eyes, and was silent for a full 5 seconds. Then, "You look terrible." "Ruby," Caleb started. "She does," Ruby said, unrepentant. Are you hurt bad? Ellie looked down at the child who had been a name in letters for 6 months. A detail here, a detail there. A girl who liked books and asked sharp questions. Now she was a small, straight-backed person in the evening light, staring up at her with the exact same directness as her father. I've been better, Ellie said, but I've also been worse. Ruby weighed that seriously. Did you bring the books? She asked. Ruby, Caleb said. She said she'd bring books, in the third letter. The books, Ellie said, are unfortunately still in the ravine, but I remember every word of each one. She paused. If you help me inside, I'll start telling you the first one tonight. Ruby looked at her father. Her father looked at her. Something moved between them that neither could have put into words, some acknowledgement, some careful shifting of the air between them. Then Ruby stepped forward and held up her small hand to help Ellie Dawson down from the horse. Ellie Dawson looked at it for just a moment, then she took it. Dr. Reeves had his office on the second floor above the hardware store, and he didn't ask unnecessary questions, which Ruby had told Ellie on the walk over was his best quality. He asked a lot of questions when Mama died, Ruby said matter-of-factly. Papa said he was just doing his job, but there's only so many questions a man needs to ask when the answer ain't gonna change. Ellie looked at the child walking beside her, still holding her hand, a fact Ruby seemed entirely unaware of, and decided not to answer that. Some things a person said needed to be heard, not responded to. The doctor confirmed everything Ellie had already assessed herself, which she took as a small private satisfaction. The ankle was badly sprained, not broken. 2 ribs bruised. The cut at her temple needed 3 stitches, which she sat through without a sound, though her fingers found the edge of the examination table and held on. You're going to need to stay off that ankle, Dr. Reeves said, drying his hands. 4 days minimum. A week would be better. I understand. I mean it, Miss Dawson. Sprain it again before it heals, and you could do real damage. I heard you, doctor. He glanced over his shoulder at her. You're the type that's going to do exactly what she wants the moment my back is turned, aren't you? I am the type, Ellie said evenly, who understands the difference between what she wants and what is necessary. Caleb, leaning against the wall near the door with his arms folded and his hat in his hands, said nothing, but she caught the corner of his mouth move. Ruby sat on a wooden stool in the corner watching Ellie, the way she watched most things with those dark, patient eyes that gave very little away. She'd been watching her since they arrived, measuring. Ellie knew that look from 11 years in a classroom. It was the look of a young person deciding whether an adult was worth trusting. The worst thing you could do was perform for that kind of attention. Children always saw through it. You had to simply be what you were and let them make up their own minds. She let Dr. Reeves help her stand, accepted the crutch he offered, and looked at Ruby. You ready? She said. Ruby hopped off the stool. Papa's cabin ain't far. I know. You told me on the way over. I told you which road. I didn't say how far. You told me it was close enough that Mrs. Hennessy can see the chimney from her kitchen window, Ellie said. That's how far. Ruby blinked. A short silence. Then, you listen real careful. Habit, Ellie said. 11 years of it. Something in the girl's face shifted. Not a smile, not quite. But the measuring look softened by exactly 1 degree. They went out into the evening, and Ellie decided that 1 degree was enough for now. Caleb's cabin was exactly what she'd expected from his letters, solid and spare, maintained with the kind of quiet care that said the man inside took his responsibilities seriously, even when no one was watching. Ruby led the way in and walked her through every room with a thoroughness that would have impressed a property surveyor, pointing out the table, the fireplace, the 2 chairs Caleb had made himself, because the ones he'd bought split at the joints in winter. He made them twice, Ruby said. The first pair weren't right either. He doesn't always get things right the first time. Most people don't, Ellie said. He got Mama right, Ruby said, already moving toward the back. She pushed open the door to a small room, her own room, Ellie realized, with the books stacked neatly to one side, and a quilt folded carefully on the chair. Papa said you should have the better room since you're the guest. I told him you're not a guest, you're staying, so it shouldn't matter which room. He said give you the better one anyway. Ellie stood in that doorway and looked at the folded quilt and the cleared floor and didn't say anything for a moment. Ruby. Ma'am? Thank you for this. The girl stood very straight. It's just a room. I know what it is, Ellie said. I'm thanking you for it anyway. Another of those silences that Ruby seemed to conduct like a small serious conductor, making space between notes. Then she nodded once and went to heat water for the wash basin, because she'd decided that was what needed doing next. And Ruby moved from task to task with a purposefulness that was remarkable in a 9-year-old, and must have been exhausting to live alongside. Caleb appeared in the doorway. She do all right showing you around, he said. She's thorough. I know the load-bearing history of both your chairs. That corner of his mouth again. She tell you I built them twice. She told me you don't always get things right the first time. Well, he looked at the floor, then back up. That's true enough. He stood there a moment, hat off, turning it in his hands the way she'd noticed he did when he wasn't sure where to put them. He was a large man, and the doorframe didn't leave much room, but he'd been careful all afternoon not to crowd her, not to stand too close without reason, and she'd noticed that too. I'll have supper going in a bit, he said. You don't have to come to the table if you'd rather rest. I'd rather come to the table, she said. He nodded. He was turning to go when she spoke again. Caleb? He stopped. The room. Was it Ruby's idea or yours? A pause. Does it matter? It matters in terms of what it tells me about you both. He considered that honestly. It was Ruby's, he said. I told her you could have the back corner of the main room. She said that wasn't good enough. He paused. I didn't argue. No, Ellie said. I didn't think you would. He held her gaze a beat longer than was strictly necessary. Then he went to start supper. Mrs. Hennessy arrived the next morning before Caleb had finished his coffee. She was a wide woman with a sharp face and opinions she distributed freely and without invitation, and she came through the door with a covered dish and a look that took in Ellie at the table, with her bandaged ankle propped on a second chair, and managed to communicate both sympathy and judgment in the same glance. You poor thing, Mrs. Hennessy said, setting the dish down. All that way and you nearly got yourself killed. I wasn't nearly killed, Ellie said. I was inconvenienced. Mrs. Hennessy blinked. You had stitches put in your head. 3. I've graded examinations in worse condition. Mrs. Hennessy looked at Caleb. Caleb looked at his coffee. Ruby, sitting across from Ellie with a book she wasn't reading, pressed her lips together very hard. Well. Mrs. Hennessy settled herself into the spare chair without being invited. I imagine you'll want to rest a good while before all the arrangements. No one would think less of you for waiting. What arrangements? Ellie said. The wedding, dear. She said it the way you'd explain something to a slow child. Given everything you've been through, it's perfectly natural to need time to reconsider. Reconsider what? Well, she spread her hands. Everything. Ellie looked at her steadily. Mrs. Hennessy, I spent 6 months writing to this man. I packed everything I own into a single trunk. I rode 3 days on a stagecoach, survived a wreck in a ravine, and spent 8 hours in July heat waiting to be found. If I had wanted to reconsider, I had ample opportunity. She picked up her coffee cup. I don't reconsider things, ma'am. I decide them. Then I move forward. The silence that followed had genuine weight. Mrs. Hennessy stood, collected herself, said she'd leave the dish, and was on her way. After the door closed, Ruby looked at Ellie with those dark eyes. She does that to everyone, Ruby said. Comes by with food and tells them what's wrong with their life. I noticed. Papa just nods at her and she leaves faster. That's a valid strategy, Ellie said. I prefer mine. Ruby looked at her for a long moment. Then, for the first time since Ellie had arrived in Red Hollow, she smiled, brief and sudden, and gone almost as fast as a struck match. It lit up her whole face for half a second, and then it was gone. It was, Ellie thought, the best thing that had happened to her in a very long time. The problem arrived 2 days later, and it arrived in the form of Judge Aldous Crane. He rode up while Caleb was out checking the east fence line, which was worse timing than it might sound. Crane was a thin man with the kind of face that had learned to smile in ways that didn't involve warmth. He sat down at Caleb's table without being invited, folded his hands in front of him, and looked at Ellie with the patient expression of a man who believed he was doing someone a kindness. "Miss Dawson," he said, "I understand you've had quite the difficult journey." "I'm recovering well, thank you." "I'm glad to hear it." He said it the way people said they were glad when they weren't. "I'll be direct with you since I imagine you're a woman who appreciates directness." "I do," she said. She did not move her ankle from where it was propped. She was not going to perform discomfort for this man. "The arrangement between you and Caleb Rohr," Crane said. "A mail-order arrangement as I understand it." "A correspondence arrangement," Ellie said. "We exchanged letters for 6 months and came to a mutual agreement." "Yes. Well." He refolded his hands the other way. "The situation is somewhat complicated." "In what way?" "Mr. Rohr has outstanding debts, Miss Dawson, to the Red Hollow Merchant Bank. The bank holds a lien against his property pending settlement." He let that sit. "I'm sure you understand why I feel it's prudent to ensure you're aware of the full situation before any legal union is formalized." Ellie was very still. "He didn't tell me." "No," Crane said. "He didn't." "How much?" Crane told her. It was not a small number. It was the number of a man who had paid doctor's bills and bought medicine and kept his daughter fed through 2 years of bad winters with no one beside him. "You're here to tell me this because," Ellie began. "Because you deserve to know what you're walking into," Crane said smoothly. "Or," she said, "because someone sent you to make sure I don't walk into it at all." Crane said nothing. "Who sent you, Judge?" "I act entirely on my own conscience, Miss Dawson." "Of course you do." She looked at him without blinking. "Let me ask you something. When a man in this town takes a wife who brings no property and no money, do you ride to his property and make sure he's fully informed of what he's walking into?" A pause. "That's not the same situation." "It's exactly the same situation. It's only different because I'm the one who came from somewhere else, and someone would like to send me back there." She folded her hands on the table. "I've been informed. Thank you for your concern." Crane stood. "I've merely provided information," he said. "What you do with it is your own business." "Yes," Ellie said. "It is." After he left, the cabin was quiet. Ruby appeared in the doorway from outside. She'd been told to go play. She'd clearly been listening at the window instead. She stood there with her chin up and no apology on her face. "How much did you hear?" Ellie asked. "All of it," Ruby said. Ellie nodded slowly. "Come sit down." Ruby came and sat across from her. They looked at each other. "He ain't told you," Ruby said, "about the money." "No." "Are you going to leave?" Ellie looked at this child who asked every hard question straight and without flinching. Who'd given up her room without being asked? Who'd smiled once in Ellie's presence and looked almost surprised by her own face for doing it? "Do you want me to?" Ellie said. Ruby's jaw worked. "No." "All right then." Ellie settled her hands flat on the table. "Is there anything else I should know?" Ruby was quiet for a moment. Then, "He tried to fix the north fence 3 times and it keeps coming down. He won't ask for help because he says he can do it himself." She picked at a groove in the table. "And he still talks to Mama. At night when he thinks I'm asleep. I can hear him through the wall." "Does it bother you?" Ellie said carefully. "That he does that?" "No." Ruby kept picking at the groove. "He sounds less sad when he does it, like he's just telling her things." A pause. "Is that strange?" "No," Ellie said. "That's love. It doesn't stop because someone's gone." Ruby looked up fast. "My mother died when I was 7, Ellie said. I still tell her things. When something happens that I think she'd want to know. She held the girl's eyes. She'd have wanted to know I made it here. The silence that followed was different from all the ones before it. It was the kind that forms when two people have said something true to each other, and both of them feel the weight of it. Then they heard Caleb's boots on the porch steps. He knew something was wrong before he got through the door. He'd learned to read the quality of quiet in a house, the kind that meant everyone was asleep, versus the kind that meant everyone was awake and not talking. This was the second kind. He found them both at the table watching him come in. "What happened?" he said. "Judge Crane paid a visit," Ellie said. Caleb went very still. He set his hat on the hook, crossed to the table, and sat down. "Ruby," he said. "I already know," she said. "I heard all of it." He closed his eyes for half a second. "Go outside, sweetheart." "But—" "Please." Ruby went with the particular quiet of a child who is displeased but choosing not to push it. The door clicked shut. Caleb and Ellie looked at each other. "You should have told me," she said. "I know. In the letters, before I packed a trunk and got on a stage." "I know." He said it again. Not as an excuse, just as a fact he was owning. "Then why didn't you—" He put both hands flat on the table and looked at them. Working man's hands. Scarred at the knuckles, rough at the palms. He'd built 2 chairs with them. He'd carried her out of a ravine with them. "Because if I'd told you," he said, "you wouldn't have come. You don't know that." "Maybe not." He looked up. "But I wasn't willing to find out." Ellie held his gaze. He could have said many things in that position. He'd chosen the truth. That was not nothing. "How close are you to losing the property?" she said. "End of September. I'm short about $200. "Do you have work coming in before then?" He frowned slightly. "Why?" "Caleb, do you have work?" "2 contracts. Should cover it if nothing goes wrong." "And if something goes wrong?" He said nothing. "All right," she said. "All right what?" "All right, I understand the situation." She unfolded her hands. "I have $42 in my trunk. It isn't 200, but it's 42 more than you had an hour ago." He shook his head. "I'm not taking your money." "It isn't for you," she said steadily. "It's for Ruby. If you lose this property in September, where does Ruby go? She let that land. That's what I thought. Now, tell me about the contracts, all of it. Then we'll figure out the rest." Caleb looked at her for a long moment. He'd written 14 letters and received 14 back, and he'd thought he understood what kind of woman was coming. He was discovering now that he'd been correct and had still underestimated her by half. "All right," he said quietly. "All right." He told her everything. That night after supper, after Ruby had gone behind her curtain in the main room, Ellie sat in the chair by the fireplace with her ankle propped up and listened to the cabin settle into its nighttime sounds. After a while, she heard Caleb go out to the porch. She'd noticed he did, that went out after Ruby slept, sat in the dark for a while. She didn't think he knew she stayed awake. She heard him speak. Low and quiet. Not to her, to someone who wasn't there. She couldn't make out the words and didn't try. She just sat in the firelight and let him have that. When he came back inside, he stopped in the doorway. "Thought you'd be asleep," he said. "Takes me a few nights in a new place." He came in and sat in the other chair, the first one he'd built, which he kept for himself, giving her the better. She'd noticed that too. They sat in the quiet. "I'm sorry," he said, "for not telling you about the debt. I know you are. It wasn't right." "No," she said, "it wasn't. But I understand why you did it. That doesn't make it right. It just makes it human." He looked at the fireplace. Sarah used to say something like that. That understanding a thing and forgiving it aren't the same, but they're in the same family. "She sounds like she was a wise woman," Ellie said. "She was." He said it with settled respect, not fresh grief. "She would have liked you." "Ruby told me something similar." He glanced over. "Ruby said that Not in those words. Close enough. Ellie paused. She's been carrying more than a 9-year-old should be carrying, Caleb. Looking after you without letting you know she's doing it. Checking on you at night. Making sure you ate. Caleb went very still. She told you that, he said. She didn't have to tell me. I watched her for 2 days. The silence that followed was not comfortable, but it was honest. I didn't know, he said. I know you didn't. She looked at him. She needs to be a child. She's been trying to hold this family together from the inside, the way children do when they think the adults need protecting. She's been trying to hold you together. He pressed both hands over his face and held them there. He didn't make a sound. He breathed. Twice. 3 times. Then he put his hands down. What do I do? He said. Let her stop, Ellie said simply. Let someone else carry some of it. That's what I'm here for if you'll let me. He looked at her across the firelit space. In 6 months of letters, she'd answered every question he'd asked, except one, whether she was coming, because she wanted a life, or because she needed an escape from one. He'd wondered. He'd decided it didn't matter. People came to new lives for all kinds of reasons, and the reasons mattered less than what they did once they arrived. Looking at her now, $42, offered without hesitation, already cataloging Ruby's habits, already mapping the problem from every angle. He thought maybe the reason mattered after all. Maybe her reason was exactly the same as his. All right, he said. All right, Ellie. It was the first time he'd used her given name. She didn't remark on it, but she didn't look away either. The wire arrived on Thursday morning. Caleb found it at the depot when he went in for a delivery, and the man behind the counter handed it over with the carefully blank expression of someone who had read something he wasn't supposed to, and was working hard to pretend otherwise. Caleb read it standing at the counter, read it twice, folded it and put it in his shirt pocket, and rode back without stopping. Ellie was at the table with Ruby working through a book that Ruby had retrieved from Dry Creek Crossing 2 days prior, without permission, without informing anyone on the neighbor's old mare, returning with 4 of Ellie's books and the hat box, and the expression of someone who had done an entirely reasonable thing and would not entertain contrary opinions. Caleb had looked at Ellie. Ellie had looked at Caleb. Some things about Ruby were simply going to be as they were. Now Ellie looked up when he came through the door and read his face the way she read everything fast and completely. Ruby, she said without looking away from Caleb. Go check on something outside for a few minutes. What am I checking on? Ruby said. Anything you haven't checked on today. Ruby looked at her father's face, closed her book, went. Caleb sat down and put the folded wire on the table between them. Ellie opened it, read it. Her face didn't change, not at the first line, not the second, not the last line that was the worst of it. She set it down. Theodore Grimby, she said. You know him, Caleb said. Yes. She was very still. He's the man I came to Wyoming to get away from. The words settled between them like a stone dropped into still water. Caleb waited. Ellie, he said, careful and quiet. Who is he? She looked at the wire on the table. Then she looked at Caleb. He is, she said, the reason I wrote you the first letter. Benchek. She told him the way she did everything directly without dramatics, letting the facts carry their own weight. Theodore Grimby was a lawyer in St. Louis. Wealthy, connected, the kind of man whose presence shifted a room. He'd been a patron of the school where she taught, which meant his money funded the school, which meant the headmistress listened to him, which meant Ellie had been required to sit across from him at a dozen fundraising dinners and be perfectly polite. He'd decided she was what he wanted. She'd told him no. He'd continued regardless. I went to the headmistress, Ellie said. She told me I was being foolish, that Theodore Grimby was a generous man and I was being unkind to him. Her voice stayed level. I went to the school board. Half of them were funded through Grimby's firm. They told me the same thing in different words. And then, Caleb said, and then he told the headmistress he was considering withdrawing his support for the expansion fund, unless certain personnel decisions were revisited. She paused. I was the personnel decision. The muscle in Caleb's jaw had gone tight. He had you fired, he said. Made redundant. There's a legal distinction. She glanced at the wire. 3 weeks later, I answered your advertisement. Caleb was quiet a long moment. What does the wire say? She picked it up and read the last line aloud. Theodore Grimby, traveling west, expected in Red Hollow inside of 2 weeks. She set it down. Someone told him where I'd gone. Who? My sister. She said it without heat. She thought she was helping. He told her he was coming to reconcile, and she believed him. A pause. She doesn't know what that word means in Theodore Grimby's vocabulary. What does it mean? Ellie looked at him steadily. It means coming to collect what he decided was his. Caleb held her eyes. When he spoke, his voice was very quiet, very flat. He's not going to find that here. No, she said. He's not. They sat across from each other with the wire between them, and everything that had been said and decided in 3 days, all the careful ground they'd covered without announcing they were covering it. We need to get married before he arrives, Ellie said. Caleb nodded once. I'll ride to the Reverend this afternoon. Caleb? Yeah. You should know I'm not marrying you to solve the Grimby problem, she said. I'm marrying you because I decided to. 6 months ago, and again every day since. This just makes the timing more urgent. He looked at her for a long moment. I know that, he said. Good. She reached for the crutch. Now go get Ruby before she dismantles something. He stood. At the door he stopped. Ellie? Yes. You should know I'm not marrying you to solve the debt problem. He said it the same way she'd said hers, straight without trimming. I'm marrying you because I read 14 letters, and then I rode to a ravine and found a woman who had already assessed her own injuries and was getting ready to walk herself to safety. He put his hat on. That's a woman I want beside me. He went out. Ellie sat alone in the cabin and listened to the summer pressing against the walls. She thought about the wire and Theodore Grimby and 2 contracts and September and a 9-year-old girl who had ridden out alone to retrieve her books from a wreck site and come back without a word of apology. Then she looked at the wire on the table. All right, Theodore, she said quietly. Come then. She folded it small, put it in her pocket, and began to plan. The Reverend, a lean man named Hooper, who had married and buried more people in Red Hollow than he cared to count, looked at the 2 of them across his desk on Friday afternoon with an expression that was carefully neutral. This is somewhat sudden, he said. We've been corresponding for 6 months, Ellie said. Nothing about this is sudden. The circumstances of your arrival are irrelevant to the question of whether I'm of sound mind and willing, she said. Which I am, on both counts. Hooper looked at Caleb. She's right, Caleb said. Sunday then, Hooper said. After service. 2 witnesses. Ruby, Caleb said. She's 9. She'll do fine, Caleb said. They were married on Sunday in the small room behind the church with Reverend Hooper Ruby and old Cass from the livery, who Caleb had asked because Cass never talked unless he had something worth saying, which made him the best kind of witness. The ceremony took 11 minutes. Hooper asked the required questions. They answered them. Caleb put a ring on Ellie's finger, his grandmother's, which she hadn't known was coming and which fit well enough to seem deliberate, though it wasn't. He'd guessed right. Afterward, on the church steps, Ruby stood between them and looked from face to face with those serious dark eyes. Are you different now? She said. From before, legally? Ellie said. But otherwise? Caleb and Ellie looked at each other. We're working on otherwise, Caleb said. Ruby considered that. All right, she said, and walked ahead of them toward the cabin, which apparently settled the matter. Cass shook Caleb's hand, tipped his hat to Ellie, and said nothing, which was exactly right. The days that followed were the strangest of Ellie's life, and she had lived through some genuinely strange ones. She had moved into a man's house, married him in 11 minutes, and was now living in close quarters with him and his daughter, while her ankle finished healing, and she learned the shape of their days. Caleb rose before dawn without fail. Ruby rose 20 minutes later with strong opinions about breakfast. The three of them ate together at the same table every morning, and the conversation was sometimes practical and sometimes unexpected, and occasionally in the spaces between words something quieter and harder to name. She taught Ruby long division on Tuesday. Ruby mastered it in 40 minutes, and then spent another 40 pushing the concept further than Ellie had intended to go, asking questions that required Ellie to stop and think before she answered. "You were right about her," Ellie told Caleb that evening. "Which part?" "The going all the way in. When she decides something's worth her attention, she doesn't do it halfway." He looked across the room at Ruby, who was applying long division to how many fence posts it would theoretically take to enclose a quarter-mile pasture at 4-foot intervals. "No," he said. "She doesn't." "She gets that from you," Ellie said. He glanced at her. "What makes you say that?" She looked back down at the book she wasn't really reading. "I've been watching you for a week. You do everything all the way in, or you don't do it at all." The silence that followed belonged to both of them equally, and neither of them rushed to fill it. It was the closest thing to peace Ellie had felt in a long time. It lasted until Wednesday. Yard. Wednesday morning. Grimby rode into Red Hollow 10 days ahead of schedule. Caleb heard it from the blacksmith before he'd gotten halfway down the main street, and he turned and went straight back to the cabin without stopping anywhere else. Ellie was at the table. She knew from his face before he opened his mouth. "He's here," she said. "Got in last night. He's at the hotel." Caleb shut the door. "He's already been asking questions. About the property. About the debt." Ellie went very still. "He knew about the debt before he left St. Louis," she said. "Apparently." She stood up, ankle be damned, and walked to the window. Stood with her back to the room a moment. Then she turned. "He planned this in full before he traveled a single mile," she said. "Arriving early. Knowing about the debt. He didn't come here to reconcile. He came to dismantle." "Ellie, he's going to remove your options one by one," she said. "And then he'll stand back and let me choose the only one left so he can say he never forced anyone." She said it flat and precise, the way she said everything that mattered. "I've watched him do it before. He's very patient." "Has he done it to you before?" A pause. "He took my position, then my reference letters. Then he went to every school administrator in St. Louis and told them I was emotionally unstable, that I had inappropriate relations with a married patron." She held Caleb's eyes. None of it was true. All of it was said with great concern and regret, and a face full of sorrow. Caleb's hands had gone flat on the table. "Ruby," he said without raising his voice. Ruby appeared from behind the curtain. She'd been there the whole time. "I heard," she said. "This time I'm not sending you outside, but listen close." He looked at his daughter. "If any man comes to this door asking to speak to your mother while I'm not here, you don't open it. You come find me, wherever I am." Ruby looked at Ellie. "Is he dangerous?" she said, not scared, assessing. "He's careful," Ellie said. "He won't do anything that looks wrong from the outside, but yes, in the ways that count, he's dangerous." Ruby nodded once hard. "All right."
Check-in, Cow.
Theodore Grimby came to the Mercantile on Thursday morning. Ellie was there buying thread moving on an ankle that was mostly healed but still tender. When she heard the door and felt the particular quality of silence that happened when a well-dressed stranger walked into a small-town store, and everyone recognized without being told that he was the kind of man who expected to be acknowledged. She did not turn around. She finished examining the thread, selected what she needed, and carried it to the counter. "Ellie," said Theodore Grimby from directly behind her. She set the thread down and said to the store owner, Mrs. Park, "I'll take 2 spools of the brown as well, please." "Ellie." Closer now. "I'd like to speak with you." She turned then because she had chosen the moment and the position, and looked at Theodore Grimby for the first time in 7 months. He was exactly as she remembered. Tall, well-tailored, with a face designed by long practice to appear both reasonable and wounded at the same time. He was wearing the expression he put on when he believed he was being generous. She had spent 2 years learning to see it for what it was. "Mr. Grimby," she said, "I don't believe we have anything to discuss." "I've come a long way, Ellie. That was your choice." "I was worried about you. The accident." "I'm fully recovered," she said. "As you can see." He looked at her ankle. "You're still favoring it." "I'm walking. There's a difference." She turned back to the counter. "You got married," he said quietly enough that only she and Mrs. Park could hear. 3 days after arriving. To a man you'd never met. "To a man I'd corresponded with for 6 months," she said. "And yes, Ellie." His voice shifted, still quiet, still controlled, but the warmth stripped down one layer. "Whatever you thought you needed, whatever you were running from, there's still a place for you in St. Louis. A good place. Better than this." She picked up her thread and her change and looked at him directly. "I wasn't running from anything, Mr. Grimby," she said. "I was running toward something. I found it. And you will discover, if you press the matter further, that I am considerably harder to redirect than I was in St. Louis." She tucked the thread into her basket. "Have a good day." She walked out. Her hands were steady. She was grateful for that. Caleb heard the account from Mrs. Park within the hour, with embellishments he didn't need, but accepted politely. "She was something," Mrs. Park said with open admiration. Turned her back on him, like he was nobody worth looking at. "She's good at that," Caleb said. He didn't look pleased. "No," Caleb said. "I don't imagine he did." He rode home and found Ellie at the table writing in the small notebook she'd started keeping since Wednesday. "I heard," he said. "Good. Saves me explaining." She didn't look up. "He'll move to the next approach now. He's finished with the personal appeal." "What's next?" "Whatever does the most damage." She set down the pen. "Did anything happen at the bank this morning? Anything that felt off?" He had stopped at the bank on his way back. He'd told himself it was routine. It wasn't. "The bank manager was nervous," Caleb said. "Ellsworth doesn't get nervous around me. 4 years of business between us." Something behind Ellie's eyes sharpened. "Go back to the bank this afternoon. Ask him directly. Don't let him talk around it." "Ask what directly?" "Whether the note on your property has changed hands," she said. The words carried their own weight. Caleb looked at her. "You think Grimby bought the debt?" "I think Theodore Grimby arrived in this town 10 days early, immediately began asking questions about your finances, and traveled from the same city where the sharpest lawyers in Missouri practice their trade." She held his eyes. "I think you should find out what he's had time to arrange before he got here." The bank manager's name was Ellsworth, and he was, as Caleb had said, a nervous man by Thursday afternoon. He took 3 attempts to arrive at what he needed to say. Caleb waded through all 3 with his hands flat on the desk. "The note," Ellsworth said, finally not meeting Caleb's eyes. "As of Monday." "Monday," Caleb said. "He arrived Sunday night." "Yes. As of Monday, the note on your property was purchased from the bank by a private investor." "By name." Ellsworth said the name. Caleb rode home hard. Ellie was still at the table. She read the answer in his face before he reached the chair. "He owns the debt," she said. "As of Monday morning." Caleb sat. "He can call it in whenever he chooses. Full amount. 30 days' notice is all the law requires." "Does he know you're short?" "He knew before he bought it. That's why he bought it." Ellie looked at nothing for a moment. "What's the full amount?" she said. He told her. "And what do you have?" He told her that too. She worked through the numbers. She'd managed the school's accounts for 4 years because the headmistress trusted arithmetic over instinct, and so did Ellie. "The 2 contracts," she said. "When do payments come in?" "End of August, then September." "That covers most of it, if both come in on schedule." She looked at him. "If Grimby calls the note in 30 days, the September payment won't be here yet." "That's right." Is there anything that can be sold between now and then? Nothing worth enough. Ellie stood up, walked to the window, came back, sat down. He picked the exact right pressure point, she said. He always does. He wants you to panic and make an error. Or he wants you to offer me a graceful exit and see if I take it. She looked at Caleb steadily. He'll come to you next. He'll be generous about it. He'll say he's a family friend, that he feels responsible for my welfare, that he wants to ensure I'm provided for. Her voice was dry as August dust. He'll offer to settle your debt, in exchange for a conversation with me. Just a conversation, he'll say. He's very good at just. He'll offer to buy you, Caleb said, more elegantly, but yes. And if I say no, he calls the note and you have 30 days. Caleb was quiet. The kind of quiet with something forming underneath it. Ellie, he said. No, she said. You don't know what I was going to say. Yes, I do. She held his gaze without moving. The answer is no. You are not going to let Theodore Grimby do anything on my behalf that gives him what he came for. We solved this ourselves. With what? He said. I don't know yet, but I know Theodore makes errors when he's certain of winning. We need to find the error. She paused. I need to see the original note, whatever he purchased from the bank. Ellsworth won't hand that over. No, she said. But a judge might compel it. And there are questions about that purchase a judge might find professionally uncomfortable if they were put to him correctly. She looked at him. Is there a lawyer in Red Hollow who isn't in Grimby's pocket? Ed Marsh, Caleb said. Older, semi-retired. Can you reach him tonight? Probably. Then do that. She was already opening the notebook. And if Grimby approaches you before then, you're polite. You say nothing. You give him nothing to work with. He looked at her across the table, at the notebook and the pen, and the focused stillness of a woman doing what she was built to do. You've thought about how to fight him before, he said. In St. Louis. In St. Louis, I had no ground to stand on. She looked up. Here I do. A pause. We do. He held her eyes for a moment. I'll find Marsh tonight, he said. Dag. Grimby came to the cabin on Friday morning. Caleb had made sure to be home. Grimby stood on the porch and knocked with the patience of a man confident of being received. Caleb opened the door and filled the frame. Mr. Rohr. The smile was warm and immediate. Theodore Grimby. I believe we have a mutual acquaintance. I know who you are, Caleb said. Then you know I've come a considerable way. Grimby glanced past him. Is Ellie available? My wife is busy, Caleb said. The word landed. Grimby's smile adjusted by the smallest possible degree. Of course. I was hoping we might speak privately, man to man. He spread both hands, a gesture practiced into appearing natural. I respect what you're doing here, Mr. Rohr. Giving Ellie a home, a fresh start. Genuinely admirable. I appreciate that, Caleb said with no inflection at all. I only want what's best for her, as I'm sure you do. Grimby paused just long enough. I understand you've encountered some financial difficulty, nothing to be ashamed of. This territory is hard on any man. Is there something specific you need, Mr. Grimby? I was thinking, Grimby said smooth as water, that it might ease the situation considerably if the matter of your outstanding debt were simply resolved. I'm in a position to assist with that. That's generous. I'd only ask that Ellie be given the opportunity to speak with me freely, without external pressure of any kind. She's always been capable of making her own choices. She is, Caleb said. Always has been. Then you have nothing to worry about, Grimby said, and the smile sharpened just slightly at the edges. I don't, Caleb agreed. And neither do you, so there's nothing to arrange between us. Grimby looked at him. I'll call the note Mr. Rohr, he said quietly, the pleasantry gone. 30 days. That property passes to the bank and then to me. That's your right, Caleb said, if the transfer holds. Something moved in Grimby's face. What does that mean? Ed Marsh is looking at the original loan documents right now, Caleb said. He has some questions about the timeline and terms of the purchase. He kept his voice flat and even. We'll know more in a day or two. Grimby said nothing. Good day, Mr. Grimby, Caleb said, and closed the door. Ellie was standing in the middle of the room. She'd heard every word. Ed Marsh, she said. Did he find something? Not yet, Caleb said. But Grimby doesn't know that. She looked at him. You bluffed. I told the truth, he said. Marsh is looking. I just didn't specify how far he'd gotten. Something moved in her face that wasn't quite a smile, but was neighbors with one. You learn fast, she said. Had a good teacher, he said. Last several days. Ruby emerged from behind the curtain. He's gone, she said. For now. He smiled the whole time, Ruby said. I watched through the window. A man who smiles all the way through like that doesn't mean any of it. No, Ellie said. He doesn't. What happens now? Ellie and Caleb looked at each other. Neither had the full answer, but they were looking in the same direction, which was more than they'd had a week ago. We wait on Marsh, Caleb said. And we don't panic. That's what he's counting on. Ed Marsh sent word on Saturday afternoon. Caleb read the note at the table. Ellie stood beside him close enough to read it over his shoulder, which she did without asking, because there wasn't time anymore for that kind of formal courtesy, and she suspected there hadn't been for a while. Marsh had found something. The sale of the debt from the bank to Grimby had been processed Monday morning legally on its face. But the original note written 4 years ago contained a specific clause, a clause that Ellsworth had apparently forgotten or hoped no one would look for. The clause stated that the note could not be sold or transferred to a private party without the debtor's consent, unless the debtor had missed 2 consecutive payments. Caleb had never missed a single payment. He can't call it, Caleb said. He can't call it cleanly, Ellie said, reading the note again. Not without your consent to the transfer, which you never gave, which means the sale is contestable. She set it down. He'll argue the clause is standard boilerplate. He'll find someone to agree with him. But it gives us ground. Is it enough? It's enough to stand on in front of Judge Crane, she said. And we need to stand on it today, publicly. Why publicly? Because everything Theodore Grimby does works in private, she said. He told people I was unstable privately, one conversation at a time. He arranged the debt purchase privately first thing Monday morning, before a single person in this town had thought to ask. She held Caleb's eyes. We are going to walk into Crane's office in the middle of town loudly enough that every person who's been watching this week and deciding what they think understands exactly what has been done here. Caleb looked at the note, looked at her. You sure? He said. Since Wednesday, she said. He picked up his hat. They were halfway down the main street when Ruby appeared. She came at a run, which Ellie recognized immediately as a performance she'd used the same tactic herself at 11 when her brother was about to take the blame for something that was hers. Ruby ran straight to Ellie's side and took her hand and looked directly at Theodore Grimby, who was coming out of the hotel with Judge Crane beside him. The timing was so precise, it took Ellie 2 full seconds to accept it wasn't planned on their side. Then she understood. Grimby had been watching the cabin. He'd seen Marsh's boy deliver the note. He'd moved immediately. He'd collected Crane before they'd gotten out of the house. 4 people on the main street. The whole town watching from windows and doorways. Grimby spoke first. He was always very good at speaking first. Mr. Rohr and Ellie. He said her name the way he always had, like it belonged to him. I was hoping we might resolve this without unpleasantness. That's what we're here for, Caleb said. I understand there's been some confusion about the note. The judge has reviewed the documents and confirmed the transfer is legally sound. The judge hasn't seen the original loan note, Ellie said. Crane shifted his weight. Now, Mrs. Rohr. Mrs. Rohr, she said evenly. Yes. Have you seen the original note, Judge, the one Caleb signed 4 years ago? The one with the transfer clause? Crane looked at the middle distance. "I've reviewed the transfer documents," he said. "That's not what I asked," Ellie said. "The original note. Have you seen it?" A longer pause. The kind that answered the question on its own. "Bring it to my office," Crane said at last. "We intended to," Caleb said. That was when Ruby made her move. She looked straight up at Theodore Grimby with those direct, unsparing dark eyes, and said in a voice that carried cleanly to every open door and window on the street, "Are you the man who got Miss Ellie fired?" The street went quiet the way streets do when a child says out loud what all the adults have been thinking around. Grimby looked down at her. Something in his prepared expression slipped. "I beg your pardon," he said. "She told me," Ruby said, which was not entirely true and not entirely false. A man who didn't like hearing the word no went to the school and told them lies until they made her leave. She looked at him without blinking. "Was that you?" "Ruby," Caleb said, quiet and level. "I'm asking," Ruby said. She did not look away from Grimby. Mrs. Park had come fully out onto the mercantile step. The blacksmith stood in his open doorway. 3 men who'd been loading a wagon on the far side of the street had stopped loading. Theodore Grimby was a man who operated in private. He was looking at a 9-year-old asking him a plain question in the middle of a public street, with all of Red Hollow watching him decide how to answer. "I don't think," he said carefully, "that this is a conversation appropriate for children." "Then answer me and I'll go," Ruby said. "Ruby." Ellie put her hand on the girl's shoulder. "That's enough." Ruby looked up at her. Something passed between them, a recognition. Ruby had done what she came to do. She stepped back, but the damage was done. Everyone on that street had just watched Theodore Grimby refuse to answer a 9-year-old's question about whether he'd lied about someone. In Red Hollow, that told a story all on its own. Grimby turned to Ellie. The pleasant surface was gone several more layers now. "I'd like to speak with you privately," he said, "without an audience." "Dad, I don't believe I need to accommodate that," Ellie said. She kept her voice level and clear and entirely audible to everyone on that street. "You came to my husband's property uninvited. You purchased a debt note through a transfer that violated the terms of the original loan agreement. You arrived 10 days ahead of schedule, while claiming you came out of concern, when in fact you'd arranged this before you left St. Louis." She held his eyes. "If you have legal standing in this matter, make your case to the judge. If you have something personal to say to me, say it here or not at all." Theodore Grimby stood in the July heat on the main street of Red Hollow and looked at the woman he'd spent 7 months tracking down. He looked at the man beside her. He looked at the child. He looked at every doorway and window on that street. Then he looked back at Ellie, and for the first time in 2 years, she saw something other than calculation in his face. It was small and brief, and he covered it fast, but it was there. "You've made your position clear," he said. "I usually do," she said. He straightened his jacket. He put his hat on. He walked back into the hotel without another word. Crane looked at Caleb. "My office," he said. "Bring the note." He walked ahead without waiting, which was the closest thing to an apology Crane had ever offered anyone, and Caleb knew better than to comment on it. He looked at Ruby. "I told you to stay home," he said. "I know," Ruby said. "We're going to discuss that later." "I know that too," she said. She was still holding Ellie's hand. She showed no intention of releasing it. Ellie looked down at her. "You didn't tell me you were going to do that." "You would have said no." "Yes," Ellie said. "I would have." Ruby looked at the hotel door where Grimby had disappeared. Did it help? Ellie looked at the judge walking ahead of them toward his office, at the people still standing in doorways, at the particular quality of a street after something has shifted in it that can't be shifted back. "You're going to give me gray hair," Ellie said. Ruby looked up at her. "Mama had gray hair," she said, very matter of fact. "Papa always said it suited her." The thing that moved through Ellie then was not a small thing. She didn't have a name for it yet, but it settled somewhere in her chest like something finding its place after a long time of looking. "Come on," Caleb said quiet. "Let's go see Crane." And the three of them walked together down the main street of Red Hollow in the July heat toward whatever the next hour would bring. Judge Crane's office smelled of tobacco and old paper, and he sat behind his desk with Ed Marsh's summary letter in one hand and the original loan note in the other, and said nothing for a long time. Caleb sat across from him. Ellie sat beside Caleb. Ruby had been left on the bench in the hallway with strict instructions that were almost certainly not going to be followed. Crane set both documents on the desk. "The clause is clear," he said. "It is," Ellie said. "The bank should have flagged it before processing the sale." "Yes," she said. "They should have." Crane looked at Caleb. "Did you give consent to the transfer?" "I did not," Caleb said. "I didn't know about it until Thursday." Another silence. Crane picked up the original note and read the clause again, which he had already read twice. He was buying time to decide something. They waited and let him buy it. "The transfer is invalid," he said at last. "Without your consent, the sale does not stand. The note remains with the bank." Caleb didn't move. Ellie let out a slow breath. "Grimby will contest it," Caleb said. "He can try," Crane said. "The clause is unambiguous. Any circuit judge in this territory will rule the same way." He set the note down and looked at Ellie directly. "I owe you an apology, Mrs. Rohr." She held his gaze and waited. "I came to your husband's property last week under the impression I was providing information," Crane said. "I was providing it selectively, and I knew it." He said it flat without decoration. "That wasn't right." "No," Ellie said. "It wasn't." "I've known Grimby's reputation in legal circles for some years," Crane said. "Reputation doesn't always match practice. I understand that better now." He stood. "I'll put the ruling in writing today. Grimby will have it by this evening." They stood to leave. "Mrs. Rohr," Crane said as they reached the door. She stopped. "That child in my hallway," he said. "She's going to be trouble for somebody someday." "Yes," Ellie said. "I'm counting on it." The ruling reached Grimby by 4 o'clock. By 5, word had reached Caleb from 3 separate people on the main street that Grimby had been seen leaving the hotel with his luggage standing beside the eastbound stage speaking to the driver and then walking back inside. He told Ellie at supper. She stopped eating. "He's not leaving," she said. "Doesn't look like it. He has one more move." She picked up her fork. "He always has one more, and he doesn't wait when he's losing." She was right. The knock came at 9 o'clock after Ruby was behind her curtain and the cabin had gone quiet. Caleb went to the door. Grimby stood on the porch alone, no luggage, no judge beside him, just the man and whatever he'd come to say. "I'd like to speak with Ellie," he said. "Not about the note, not about legal matters. I'm asking as a man who has known her 3 years." "She'll decide that," Caleb said. He stepped back and looked at her. Ellie was already standing. She came to the door. "5 minutes," she said. Caleb moved to go inside. "Stay," she said quietly. He stayed. Grimby looked at Ellie on that porch with an expression she'd seen on his face only once before, a long time ago, before she'd understood what lived underneath it. "I'm not going to argue the note," he said. "Crane is right. I moved too fast and cut a corner. That's done." "Yes," Ellie said. "It is. I want you to understand something." He said it without the lawyer's smoothness. "I came here because I was not willing to accept that you'd simply gone. I wrote you a letter before I left," she said. "I told you exactly why." "I know." "Then you had my explanation." "An explanation isn't the same as understanding," he said. "No," she said, "but it's all I owed you." She looked at him directly. "Theodore, what you did in St. Louis, the school, the references, the private conversations with people who trusted you, you think of that as persistence. I know you do. You think you were pursuing something that was yours." She paused. "It was never yours. I told you that. You didn't believe me, so you made it cost me something to say it again. That's not persistence. That's punishment. Something moved in his face. He didn't answer immediately. I didn't mean it to be, he said. I know you didn't, Ellie said. That's the part that should concern you most. Silence. You're happy here, Grimby said. Not a question. She looked at the light in the cabin window. At everything she'd built in 10 days in this place, with a man she'd known 10 months through letters and 1 week in person. I'm where I'm supposed to be, she said. That's different from happy. It's better. He looked at her a long moment. He's a good man, Grimby said. It cost him something. Yes, she said. He is. Another silence, the longest one. Ellie? He put his hat on, then stopped. I have a letter that I was going to use tomorrow in front of the town at the courthouse. Something you wrote. He stopped again. Her jaw tightened. Which letter? The one to your sister, January. He paused. When you were lonely and frightened and not certain about any of this. You wrote things about whether you were making an error, whether a woman your age had any right to expect. He stopped. It was private. Your sister gave it to me because she thought it proved you weren't thinking clearly. Ellie was very still. You were going to read it publicly, she said. I was going to use it, he said, to demonstrate that you'd come here in a moment of poor judgment and that a woman of your intelligence deserved better consideration. He said it quietly, almost honestly. I'm not going to use it. She looked at him. I'm telling you because you deserve to know it existed, he said. He reached into his jacket and held out an envelope. And because I'd like to return it to you. She took it, held it in both hands, did not open it. Theodore, she said, go home. He nodded once, went down the porch steps, did not look back. She stood there until she couldn't hear his boots on the road anymore. Then she went inside. Caleb was at the table. He'd heard every word. She sat across from him and put the letter between them. You don't have to tell me what's in it, he said. I know. She looked at the envelope. I wrote it in January. I was having a hard week. I told my sister I wasn't sure I was doing the right thing, that I was 34 years old, had nothing left in St. Louis, and I was afraid that was the real reason I was going. Not courage, just running out of other choices. Caleb said nothing. I was afraid it was true, she said. That I wasn't being brave, that I was only desperate. And now, he said. She looked up. Now I've been here 10 days, she said. I've met your daughter and seen how she watches you when you don't know she's looking. I've watched you build something real with your hands and refuse to let it fall even when it was hard. I've watched you tell me the truth when lying would have been easier. She held his eyes. I think I was right to come. I think I was right for a better reason than I knew in January. He looked at her across the table, at this woman who had assessed her own injuries in a ravine and offered her last $42 and walked into a street confrontation without flinching and was still right now being honest about the moment she'd been afraid. Most people hid that moment. She'd just handed it across the table like it was information he had a right to. Ellie, he said. I know it's only been 10 days, she said. I'm not saying anything grand. I'm saying I think we're going to be all right. The three of us. She paused. More than all right. He was quiet a moment. Sarah used to say the difference between a house and a home, he said, was whether the people in it had chosen each other. He looked at the table, then back at her. I think she'd agree with you. Ellie said nothing. She picked up the letter, held it for a moment, got up, went to the fireplace and set it in. We don't need that anymore, she said. Caleb watched it burn. Neither spoke for a while after that. In the morning, Grimby was gone. The hotel confirmed he'd taken the early stage east before dawn, which was exactly when a man left a town he wasn't willing to be seen leaving. Red Hollow noted his absence the way small towns noted most things through Mrs. Park first, then the blacksmith, then everyone else inside the hour. Word traveled faster than the stage, as it always did. and the word, as best Ellie could tell from what reached her, was that a man from St. Louis had come to Red Hollow to retrieve something that wasn't his and had gone home with nothing. That was the story Red Hollow told. It was accurate enough. What happened next, Ellie hadn't anticipated. Mrs. Hennessy arrived at 10 o'clock with a covered dish, her second one, which meant she'd been planning it since the day before, and sat down without being invited, same as always. But this time, she put her hands flat on the table and looked at Ellie straight on. "I was unkind to you when you arrived," she said. "I came by with food and then told you to reconsider a decision you'd already made. That was not my business." Ellie looked at her. "I was also unkind to Caleb every time I suggested this arrangement was less than serious," Mrs. Hennessy continued. "I'm saying so because I think you already know it, and because I'd rather you hear it from me directly than wonder about it." "I appreciate that," Ellie said. "You handled that man on the street yesterday with more grace than I'd have managed," Mrs. Hennessy said. "And what that child did—" She stopped, shook her head. "That child." "Yes," Ellie said. "That child." Mrs. Hennessy looked toward the curtain where Ruby's corner was. "She's been needing a mother for 2 years," she said, quieter now. "I think she might have found one." Ellie didn't answer that, but she didn't deny it either. The first contract payment came in on the 28th of August. Caleb brought it home and put it on the table and sat down and did the math for the third time that week, because the math was good, and he kept wanting to make sure it was real. Ellie sat across from him and did the math herself, which took considerably less time. "The second payment in September covers the rest," she said, "with some left over." "Should be," he said, "if the Hendersons pay on schedule." "Have they before?" "Always." "Then we're fine," she said. "We were always going to be fine." He looked at her. "You knew that—" "I thought it was very likely," she said. "I didn't say so because I didn't want you to stop taking the problem seriously." He looked at her for a long moment. "You let me worry." "Controlled worry is useful," she said. "It keeps people careful." He shook his head, and something in his face did what it rarely did. It went loose and easy the way a man's face goes when he's both exasperated and relieved, and doesn't have it in him to stay only one or the other. "Ellie," he said. "Yes." "Don't do that again." "I'll consider it," she said. He looked at the numbers on the table, looked at her, and then carefully he reached across and put his hand over hers. She looked down at it. Then she turned her hand over and held on. They sat like that in the quiet of the cabin with the August heat outside and the numbers on the table and nothing else that needed saying. Goak. It was Ruby who named it. She'd been watching the two of them for weeks the way she watched everything from a slight distance measuring. On a Saturday morning in late August, she came into the kitchen where Ellie was working through a reading lesson designed specifically for Ruby's brand of impatience, and stopped in the doorway. "Miss Ellie," she said. Ellie looked up. Ruby stood straight, hands at her sides, the focused, deciding something expression that Ellie had learned to recognize as the signal for something that mattered. "I've been thinking," Ruby said. "All right," Ellie said. "Papa calls you Ellie," Ruby said. "Mrs. Hennessy calls you Mrs. Roar. Kids at the schoolhouse will call you Miss or Ma'am." She paused. "But I don't know what I'm supposed to call you." Ellie set down the lesson. "What would you like to call me?" Ruby applied the same seriousness she gave long division. "I thought about Ellie," she said, "like Papa, but it doesn't feel right." She looked at the floor, then back. "And Mrs. Roar is a stranger name." "It is," Ellie said. "My mama was Mama," Ruby said. "And she's still Mama. That doesn't change." She said it cleanly, without apology, and with full understanding of its weight. "But there's a word that means the person who's here, the person who's going to be here." She met Ellie's eyes. "Can I call you that?" Ellie looked at this 9-year-old who had ridden alone to a ravine to rescue her books, who had walked into a standoff and asked a powerful man a question he couldn't answer, who watched her father through a curtain at night and taught herself mathematics past the assigned lesson, and had given up her room without being asked. What word? Ellie said. Ma, Ruby said. Quiet. Just that. Ellie didn't say anything for a moment. Then, yes, you can call me that. Ruby nodded, pulled the reading lesson toward her. All right, she said. What are we doing today? Ellie looked at the lesson. At Ruby. At the window, and the light coming through it, and the summer that was starting finally to soften at the edges, toward something cooler and less relentless. Long sentences, Ellie said. You've been avoiding them. They're inefficient, Ruby said. They're expressive, Ellie said. There's a difference. Ruby made a face. Fine. Ellie smiled, not the careful measuring kind she'd been managing since she arrived. A real one, the kind that came from somewhere she hadn't visited in a long time. She picked up her pen. They got to work. That evening, Caleb came home to find Ellie and Ruby at the table, with papers spread between them, arguing cheerfully about whether a sentence needed a second clause, or whether the first had already said everything worth saying. He stopped in the doorway. He'd come home to an empty house for 2 years, to a table with one chair pushed out and supper gone cold, and the particular silence of a place that was missing most of what made it worth returning to. He'd gotten through those 2 years because Ruby needed him to, and because there wasn't another option, and because Caleb Rohr was not a man who stopped doing what needed doing just because it hurt. He stood in the doorway and listened to his daughter tell Ellie that the second clause was unnecessary, and Ellie tell Ruby that the second clause was the entire point, and something in his chest settled with a quiet, permanent click that he felt all the way down. He came inside. Papa, she wants me to write a long sentence, Ruby said by way of greeting. Sounds right, he said. Ruby looked betrayed. You don't even know what it's about. Doesn't matter, he said. She's probably right. Probably, Ellie said without looking up, the corner of her mouth moving. He sat down at the table. Ruby argued her case. Ellie listened and pushed back and made Ruby think harder than she wanted to, which was exactly what Ruby needed and had always needed and hadn't had in quite this way until now. Later, after Ruby was behind her curtain and the cabin had gone quiet, Caleb sat in his chair by the fireplace. Ellie sat in hers, the same 2 chairs he'd built twice, the same fire burning the way it always did. Everything else was different. She called you something today, Caleb said. Ruby. Ellie looked at the fire. Yes. I heard it. He was quiet a moment. Was that all right that she... Yes, Ellie said. It was all right. He looked at her profile in the firelight for a moment, at the set of her jaw and the way she held herself, not tense, not guarded, just present. Fully present, the way she'd been since the ravine, the way he was starting to realize she was in all things. Ellie, he said. I need to say something. She looked at him. I brought you here under a false picture, he said. The debt what the situation really was. And you came anyway. You put your $42 on the table and found Ed Marsh and stood on that street and I... He stopped. Tried again. I have not been all the way in on this yet. Not all the way. I think I was afraid of what it meant if it worked. Because the last time I had something that worked... He didn't finish. He didn't need to. I know, Ellie said quietly. I'm all the way in now, he said. Whatever comes next, the property, the contracts, whatever Grimby does from a distance, I'm in it with you. Not beside it. In it. Ellie looked at him across the fire-lit space between the 2 chairs. Caleb, she said. Yeah. I know, she said. I've known since you closed that door on Grimby and bluffed about Ed Marsh without missing a single beat. She paused. That's when I knew. He looked at her. A man who bluffs for the right reasons, she said, is a man worth trusting. The fire shifted. The cabin settled around them. Outside, the last of the summer heat pressed softly against the walls, gentle now the way hard things sometimes went gentle once they'd done what they came to do. And for the first time in 2 years, Caleb Rohr was exactly where he was supposed to be. The Henderson payment arrived on the 12th of September, a Thursday. which was also the day Ellie walked from the cabin to the mercantile and back without the crutch. She didn't tell anyone she was going to try. She just put the crutch against the wall when she stood up from breakfast, walked out the door, and didn't look back at it. Ruby watched from the table. "Your ankle," Ruby said. "I know where my ankle is," Ellie said. "You're not supposed to push it." "I'm not pushing it. I'm testing it." "That's the same thing." "Ruby," Ellie said, "eat your breakfast." She made it there and back in under 30 minutes. The ankle held. It complained on the last quarter mile, but complaining was not the same as giving out, which was a distinction she'd made about a number of things recently. When she got back, Caleb was home. He'd ridden in from the Henderson property with the payment in his jacket and the particular look of a man who had just set down something he'd been carrying too long. He put the money on the table. Ellie sat across from him. They looked at the numbers. "That's all of it," she said. "That's all of it," he said. Neither spoke for a moment. There wasn't much that needed to be. The debt was gone. The property was theirs fully, cleanly, without condition. It had been theirs on paper before. Now it was theirs, in fact, which was entirely different, and both of them understood the difference between paper and fact. "Caleb," Ruby said from the doorway. She'd been standing there long enough to understand what was on the table. "Does this mean we're keeping the cabin?" "We're keeping the cabin," he said. Ruby looked at the table, looked at both of them. Then she went back outside, which was how she handled large feelings, by finding something physical to do until they settled. Caleb watched her go. "She's been afraid to count on things," Ellie said. "I know. She'll be better now. It'll take a little time, but she'll be better." He looked at her. "You sure about that?" "Yes," Ellie said, simply. "I'm sure." He believed her. He'd learned in the past weeks that when Ellie said she was sure, she had already considered the ways she might be wrong and decided they weren't sufficient to change her conclusion. That was a particular kind of confidence, not the kind built on never being wrong, but the kind built on knowing how to be wrong and stand back up from it. He was learning from it, whether he'd intended to or not. The letter from St. Louis arrived on a Friday, 3 days after the payment cleared. It was from Ellie's sister Clara, 4 pages, and Ellie read it at the table while Caleb was out and Ruby was doing lessons. Her face during the reading was something Ruby watched carefully from behind her papers without appearing to. When Ellie set it down, Ruby said, "Bad news." "Complicated news," Ellie said. "Is it about him?" "It is." Ellie picked the letter up again, read one section, set it down. "My sister is apologizing for giving him my letter, for telling him where I'd gone." She paused. "She also says that after Grimby returned to St. Louis, he consulted with 2 lawyers about filing a formal complaint, contesting the marriage." Ruby went still. "Can he do that?" "He can file it," Ellie said. "That doesn't mean it holds." She folded the letter precisely. According to Clara, both lawyers told him the same thing, that a woman who walked into a judge's office 3 days after a stagecoach accident and successfully challenged a fraudulent debt transfer was not going to be found by any court to be of unsound mind. Ruby sat with that. "So he tried, and it didn't work." "He tried," Ellie said. "It didn't work." "And Clara, she's asking if I'll write back. She says she understands if I don't." Ruby was quiet a moment. Then, "Are you going to—" "Yes," Ellie said. "She made an error in judgment. She's not a bad person." She paused. "People aren't their worst decisions." Ruby looked at her. "Is that something you believe or something you say?" Ellie met the girl's eyes. "Both," she said. "That's the only way it works." Ruby thought about that, with the inward-focused look that meant she was going to turn it over for a while before she was finished with it. Then she picked up her pencil and went back to her lesson. Ellie started composing her reply in her head. When Caleb got home, she told him about the letter. He took it the way he took most things, quietly, with his hands still and his face doing the processing. When she finished, he looked at the table for a moment. "He tried to undo the marriage," he said. "He tried," Ellie said. It's done. You're not angry. She thought about it honestly. I was angry in St. Louis, she said, when I had no ground and he could do damage and I couldn't stop it. Here, she paused. Here I have ground. Here it didn't work. Staying angry at something that didn't work is a waste of time I'd rather spend on other things. He looked at her for a long moment. I'm trying to figure out if you're always like this, he said. Like what? This practical. Even about things that ought to hurt. Things do hurt, she said. I just don't perform the hurting. She held his eyes. My mother used to say that feeling something and displaying it are two separate choices. You can feel it without putting it on a stage. He was quiet. She was right. She usually was. Ellie tucked the letter into her notebook. Tomorrow, I want to talk to you about the schoolhouse. He looked at her. The schoolhouse. 12 children in this town without a teacher, she said. 11 years of teaching. I think that's a relevant combination of facts. Caleb looked at her with the expression she'd come to recognize as the one he wore when she'd done something he hadn't seen coming, but probably should have. All right, he said. We'll talk about it. Good, she said, and picked up her pen. Yonk. She started Thursday. 12 children ranging from 6 to 14, wider than she'd taught before, but not unmanageable. She'd taught rural children in her later years at St. Louis, children who came in tired and left tired and were still curious about things if you found the right angle. These were the same children. Different territory, same essential fact of childhood. The parents were another matter. 3 came that first morning to look at the new teacher, which was their right. One of them, a rancher named Fulton, with a son in the 11-year-old range, and opinions he wore loudly, stood in the doorway and looked her over. You're Roar's mail-order wife, he said. I'm Mrs. Roar, she said. Your son is welcome in my classroom, Mr. Fulton. I heard you were a teacher back east. 11 years. Why'd you stop? The other 2 parents were listening. 12 children were listening the way children listen when adults are deciding something that will affect them. The position ended, Ellie said, and I decided to come west. She held his eyes. Your son is welcome in my classroom. Whether you send him is your choice. But if you do, I'll teach him well. That's not a promise I make lightly. Fulton looked at her. Looked at his son, who was standing at the back of the room with the expression of a boy who very much wanted to stay and was trying not to show it. All right, Fulton said. He left. The boy stayed. By the end of the first week, Fulton had sent word through Mrs. Park that his son had come home and done extra arithmetic voluntarily, which had never happened before in the recorded history of their household, and he wanted to know what Ellie had done. Mrs. Park told Ellie this with open delight. What should I tell him? She asked. Tell him I made it interesting, Ellie said. He can decide what to do with that. Ruby came to the schoolhouse in the second week. She sat in the back beside Fulton's boy and watched Ellie teach with those dark, evaluating eyes for approximately 20 minutes. Then she stopped watching and started participating, which for Ruby meant asking the question everyone else was thinking but hadn't said. Why does long division work? She said, interrupting a lesson on fractions. You taught me how to do it. You didn't explain why it works. 11 other children looked at her. Ellie looked at her. That, Ellie said, is the right question. And answering it is going to take us somewhere considerably more interesting than fractions. Put your worksheets aside. 12 children put their worksheets aside. Ruby looked briefly privately satisfied, which was as close to smiling in public as she usually got. Caleb heard about it from Fulton at the livery that Friday. Fulton's son had gone home and explained to his father why long division worked in terms that Fulton admitted he himself had never understood. Your daughter did that, Fulton said. My wife did that, Caleb said. Ruby just asked the right question. Fulton looked at him, thought about it. You got a good family roar, he said the way a man said something he'd been working his way toward for a while. Yeah, Caleb said. I do. He rode home with that sitting in his chest like something warm and solid, and he didn't try to name it or put it away. He just let it be there. Cass came to the cabin door on a Saturday morning with his hat in both hands, which meant something worth saying. He'd spoken that morning with a business associate of Grimby's passing through and resting a horse who'd mentioned that Grimby's formal complaint had been dismissed. But that wasn't the thing Cass had come to say. The thing was why Grimby had stopped. Not the legal reason. The personal one. Someone had written to Grimby from Red Hollow. A formal letter signed by 7 residents. Judge Crane, Mrs. Hennessy, Mrs. Park, Ed Marsh, Fulton, Dr. Reeves, and Cass himself. The letter stated plainly that Ellie Dawson Rohr was a woman of sound mind and strong character who had chosen to make her life in Red Hollow, that she was known to the community and respected in it, and that any further legal action aimed at disrupting her life would be met with a formal response from every signatory. Cass had signed it 3 weeks ago. He hadn't mentioned it because he hadn't thought it was his news to tell. But now that it had worked, he reckoned someone ought to know. He put his hat on and left. Caleb stood in the doorway a moment. Then he went inside. Ellie was at the table grading papers. Ruby was on the floor with a book. He told them. Ruby put her book down slowly. Ellie went very still. "Mrs. Hennessy organized it," Caleb said. "And 6 others?" Ellie said. She said it quietly, working through the names. "Crane? Fulton?" She stopped. "I didn't know." "Neither did I," Caleb said. Ruby said from the floor, "I did." They both looked at her. "Mrs. Hennessy came by 2 weeks ago when you were at the schoolhouse," Ruby said. "She asked me if you were happy here, if you were staying." Ruby looked at her hands. "I told her you were staying because you decided to, and that when you decided something it was decided." She paused. "She didn't tell me about the letter, but she was writing something when she left." The cabin held the quiet of that for a moment. "Ruby," Ellie said. Ruby looked up. "Ma." Just that. The same way she'd said it the first time, quiet and settled and without a trace of uncertainty. "Thank you," Ellie said, "for telling her." "It was true," Ruby said. She picked up her book. "I was just saying what was true." That evening, after Ruby was asleep behind her curtain, Caleb and Ellie sat in the 2 fireplace chairs the way they had since the first week. The same fire, the same quiet. Everything else different. 7 people, Ellie said. 7, he said. "I've been here 6 weeks." "I know." She looked at the fire. "In St. Louis, I lived 6 years, and the people who knew me best stood back and said nothing when it mattered." She wasn't bitter, just noting it accurately. 6 weeks here, and 7 people signed their names to a letter. "This is a different kind of place," Caleb said. "You're a different kind of man," she said. "They signed for you as much as for me." "They signed because you earned it," he said. "Nobody in this town does anything for somebody else's sake. Not Crane, not Fulton. Definitely not Cass." He held her eyes. "They signed because they watched you stand on that street and hold your ground. Because they watched you walk into a schoolhouse and make Fulton's boy want to learn. Because Ruby calls you Ma, and Ruby has never once been wrong about a person in her life." Ellie looked at him. "Caleb," she said. "Yeah, I need to say something." She turned in her chair to face him fully. "When I wrote you the first letter, I wrote 12 drafts. 12. I threw away 11 because they were trying to be something I wasn't, promising things I wasn't sure I could deliver, describing myself in ways I thought would be acceptable rather than true." She paused. "The 12th was the real one. And the real one said I was a school teacher who was competent and stubborn and not particularly easy to live with, and that I was looking for something genuine in exchange for the same. I wrote back in 2 days," he said. "I counted." She looked at her hands, then at him. "I've been careful since I arrived about what I name. Careful is how I've always done things. But I think careful has served its purpose." She met his eyes. I love this place. I love that child behind that curtain. And I know not eventually, not if things go well, I know it the way I know the debt is cleared and the north fence needs fixing, that I am going to love you. She said it the way she said everything that mattered, straight and without decoration. I wanted you to know that. Caleb looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached across the space between the chairs and put his hand against her face, the same hands that had built this cabin and carried her from a ravine and held his daughter on the worst day of their lives. Ellie, he said. Yes. I've been in love with you since you took that letter and put it in the fire, he said. I didn't say it because I was afraid the words would be too much too fast. Nothing is too much, she said. I know that now. You should have known it from the first letter, she said. I know that too. The fire shifted. Outside, a wind moved through the cottonwoods, and the September night pressed cool and soft against the cabin walls, the same walls Caleb had built before he understood what kind of life they were going to hold. He hadn't known when he built them that he was building for three, or maybe some part of him had. Maybe that was why he'd gone back and done it twice until it was right. The north fence, Ellie said after a while. Monday, he said. I'll come with you, she said. Your ankle? Walk to the mercantile and back Thursday without the crutch, she said. Didn't mention it. He looked at her. You didn't mention it. You would have argued. I would have come with you, he said. Same thing, she said. He shook his head, and she watched his face do what it rarely did, go loose and easy and entirely unguarded. You are the most, he started. Practical, she offered. Determined, he said. I'll accept that, she said. They sat together in the quiet of the cabin while the fire burned down and the night deepened outside, and behind the curtain, Ruby slept the full, uncomplicated sleep of a child who had finally stopped holding everything up from the inside. A child who had ridden alone to a ravine to rescue a stranger's books, who had walked into a standoff and asked a powerful man the one question he couldn't answer, who had given up her room and said one word and meant it all the way through. Ma. In Red Hollow, Wyoming, in the first cool week of September 1883, 2 people had built something out of 14 letters, and 1 stagecoach wreck, and $42, and a contested debt note, and a street confrontation, and 7 signatures on a letter that traveled all the way back to St. Louis, and ended what needed ending. They had not built it easily. They had not built it without fear, without error, without the specific weight of everything they'd each survived to get to this particular cabin, this particular fire, these particular 2 chairs. But they had built it, and it was standing. Caleb Rohr had ridden out to a ravine to find a woman he had never met and found instead the rest of his life. Ellie Dawson had crossed half a country on a gamble and arrived broken and furious and absolutely undefeated, and had stayed not because she had nowhere else to go, but because she had looked at this man and this child and this hard, honest, unforgiving land and chosen it clear-eyed and deliberate, the way she chose everything that mattered. They had chosen each other, and in Red Hollow in the family, they had made from courage and letters and stubbornness and grace. That choice was permanent, and it was real, and it was enough, more than enough, to build a life on. That was the whole of it. That was every word that mattered.